For this quarter's independent blog post, I'm going to be talking about something I feel passionate about, racism. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about how colorblind attitudes perpetuate racism. Colorblindness when it comes to race is simply the concept of ignoring race or color. You may have heard people say things such as, "I don't see race or color, I only see people," or "Racism is perpetuated by people who continue to see race." These people are attempting to eradicate racism by ignoring race, and consequently, they're ignoring racism. Colorblind people aren't like white supremacists, where they are outright racist, and it's very easy to call them out for their racism. They're really trying not to be racist, which is why colorblindness is actually more dangerous and harmful than white supremacy. But racism is actually a system of advantage and disadvantage based on race. Racism is not simply the belief that one race is superior to the other. In America, racism benefits white people and disenfranchises people of color. White people have white privilege, meaning that they benefit from racism. This does not mean that white people are bad, but it does mean that the same system that oppresses people of color gives white people certain privileges. For example, a white male with a criminal record is 5% more likely to be employed than a male of color with a clean record. What colorblindness does is ignore the fact that people of color are disadvantaged because of their color. For example, to a person who's trying to not see race, our justice system sends people to jail, not disproportionately people of color. If you don't see race, then you can't see that police brutality is targeted toward people of color and that racism and economic inequality are inextricably linked. Colorblind attitudes also delegitimize people's racial identities. By telling people that they are perpetuating racism by seeing color, colorblind people are actually telling people that to have a racial identity is to perpetuate racism, which really just makes people of color feel guilty and ashamed of their race. This is definitely not a way to eradicate racism. Most colorblind people are white, and in a predominantly white society, white people really don't have to think about their race a lot. If everyone around you speaks English, for example, then speaking English probably won't be a large part of your identity. Similarly, many white people probably don't think a lot about their race as being a part of their identity. It's easy for them to abandon their racial identity when they don't have to worry about being different or even disenfranchised because of it. One argument that colorblind people often use is that race doesn't exist because it is a social construct, and race has no biological basis. This is true, but simply because something has been constructed by society does not mean that it does not exist. Religion, gender, and even government are all social constructs because they've been constructed by societies, but they're all very real. Even racism is a social construct, but it is real nonetheless, and it is extremely hurtful. You cannot deny the existence of certain things just because they have been constructed by society. Acknowledging race, by the way, does not mean that you should treat people differently based on race. It just means that you recognize that people are of different races. You should treat everyone like a person, regardless of their race, but also acknowledge that the struggles people face and the privileges they may have can be on account of their race. We can only eradicate racism by talking about it and facing it head on. We cannot ignore the history of racism, and we cannot ignore its presence today.